we
This
are.
conference will now be recorded.
All right, so if you look at this, I now have, let's say, the YAML pipeline built. Let me go into the develop branch. And in the stages, I just have one stage called as a build stage, wherein I'm going ahead and mentioning what is the pool that I'm, let's say, going ahead and creating this particular, let's say, build in. And in here, I went ahead and gave a Microsoft hosted pool, which is called Windows latest. And then I declared a couple of variables, and then I went ahead and used something known as jobs. And under the job, I went ahead and said what is the job that I'm trying to run. And here I said, okay, fine, this is a .NET restore in the steps, .NET build, a .NET publish. And finally, I went ahead and did a publish artifact out here as such. So this is what I did end to end in order to create a simple build pipeline using the YAML language that I have. And once I run this particular pipeline, I have the artifact that I'm getting. So I have all these artifacts that's getting produced, that's getting published out here. So this is what I'm doing using the YAML syntax out here as such. So anyone, any questions with this particular syntax? Anything that I can take? Any confusions here? Anything that I can take before I get started with something called as multi-stage pipelines, which include both build and release in the same thing. So anyone, any questions that I can take till you? All right, so
Sir,
let's
good
get
morning, sir.
started then. Go ahead, please. Sorry.
Sir, I have one small doubt, sir. Sir,
Go ahead,
in
please.
the stages, there are something called, pool is there, na, sir. We are selecting any desk for,
Mm-hmm,
any
mm-hmm.
CPU for build platform. It
Yes,
is for
yes, correct.
Microsoft. This is for Microsoft host. Sorry, Microsoft agent. That's we are selecting any CPU. Now, for self-host agent, sir, what we are going to select, sir, in
No,
the
this
under
is not.
build platform.
Yeah, so this is not for the agents that we are selecting. This is
Mm-hmm.
to build your code. So when you want to build your code, you probably
Okay.
want to tell that this code that you build want to, or you want to run this particular code on any CPU, meaning you want to deploy it on Linux or you want to deploy it on Windows or something like that. So you're just telling, okay, fine, whether the code I build, is it compatible with the 64-bit CPUs or is it compatible with 32-bit CPUs? Where exactly can my code run? This has nothing to do with the agent. Your
Okay.
agent is, this has nothing to do with that. So this is just for your code build options out here as such.
Okay, sir. Sir, and one more doubt,
Mm-hmm.
sir.
Go please.
Sir, when we enable the continuous deployment for trigger for pipeline release for
Mm-hmm.
pipeline,
Mm-hmm.
that time under that the triggers we have something called a branch specification, right? From which branch it should trigger, means
Yes.
like developer
Yes.
something
Branch
is there.
filter. Right.
So yeah, branch filter. So for
Correct.
example, if initially that is in development, if for example let's say initially it's in development branch,
Mm-hmm.
on top
Mm-hmm.
of that, so
Mm-hmm.
in futures I'm going to already the code in running in production, so in future I have created one release branch on top of the develop branch. From next
Okay.
time onwards, if there are there any
Mm-hmm.
hot fixes are there,
Mm-hmm.
so I need to change that to release
Yes.
branch, right, under that.
Yes. You need
So
to change this
should I
release
do
branches.
manually?
Yes, we can do manually. Since it's a one-time activity, we can do manually.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Before going to deploy the, so before developer pushes the
Mm-hmm.
code into the that release branch, that time you have to set this to release as a DevOps
Correct.
engineer, right, sir?
Correct.
Who will, so that intimated by the developer, so I'm going to change this kind of, so you have to set something nice, sir.
So usually you will have between the developers and within DevOps engineers, you usually have a team which will manage all these releases. And usually you will have something called release managers in coming into picture. They'll inform us telling that, okay, fine, please go change the branch, and we can go ahead and change those things out here.
Okay, okay, sir.
Okay.
And one more small
Good,
doubt,
please.
sir. Sir,
Good, please.
when we are going to use functional web apps, sir, I mean, as of now, we have seen web apps on Windows something. So, where
Correct.
exactly this functional web is useful?
So function applications come into picture when you want to do something like an event driven, let's say, kind of a condition. For example, let's say that if a user in the front end goes ahead, clicks on a button, that button should go ahead and, let's say, uh, trigger off my function application. So function apps are something called as an event driven, let's say, APIs out there that are available, which will go ahead based on an action. go ahead and let's say run a particular code or run a particular piece of code out here. Whereas web apps are 24 by 7 applications that require 24 by 7 availability. All those are run on a web app. Whereas functions are even driven or driven by a particular event out here. For running small code and all that stuff. That's where functions come into picture. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, is there any session for functional developer, sir?
So
Not
function apps,
notified.
the problem is that it's completely code dependent. So I do not have a session for function applications, but I'll see if there is any example that I can kind of send across your way.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
No problem. Any more questions, guys? Okay. So let me go to our pipeline and let me use the develop branch and let me start by adding one more stage out here. So I'll remove the first, I have the first stage, which is just the entire build. And I can actually call this as build, not a problem. I can go ahead and say this is a build. I'll just scroll down and exactly under the build stage, exactly under the build stage, I can go ahead and declare one more stage, telling that this is a development. So I'm now trying to replicate what is there in my release pipeline. So this is my release pipeline, and this is a classic release pipeline. I had development, I had QA, I had let's say something like stage, I had production, right? This is what I'm now trying to replicate here. So I'll say development. This is the stage that I want to do, and I can give the same display name called. I can give the same display name called as development out here, and I can now go ahead and I need to mention the pool. Again, I'll use the same pool called let's say VM image, and I'll say the image here is a Windows latest image. And instead of now declaring variables like the way I declared earlier, wherein I passed in key value pairs, what I'll now do is I'll call a variable group. So I have multiple variable groups. Remember, we created all these variable groups for app service plan, and all these things out. I'll say for this one, I'll just change it to dev. Save this out. I'll say in my pipeline, in order to call a group, I'm coming under variables, tab under the variables. I'll say hyphen space, say group. I'll say the group name is called development. So I'm calling my development group out here. I'm telling this is the group name. And instead of now giving key value pairs, individual key value pairs, I'm calling the entire variable group out here. Sorry, I'm calling the entire variable group out here as such. And I'll just say control space. And I'll now start giving something called as jobs out here. So until here, everything was same. So from here, if you look at my stages, if you look at the build stage, display name pool in variables in place of let's say something like a key value pair, I'm just going ahead declaring the entire variable group out here. And here, after I declare the variable group, I'll go ahead and say jobs. And inside the jobs, instead of now telling that this is a job like the way I did earlier, I'll say I'm now going for a deployment. As in when I go for a deployment, there is something called as a deployment strategy that we have to mention. Meaning, do you want to do something called as a rolling deployment? I'll talk about what a rolling deployment, what is run once, and all these things out. I'll say enter. I'll say good enough. I will say firstly the environment. I'll say it's a development environment. And once that's done, I'll talk about why I'm declaring this particular thing called as an environment. I'll do that also. But environment is a very important parameter that I need to pass here. And I'm telling this is a development environment. And after that, I'll talk about what is my strategy. So again, there are multiple strategies out here. Again, in the strategy, I'll just go inside the strategy, and there are multiple kind of strategies that you can employ called canary, rolling, and run once. I'll take run once. This is the most used strategy out there. Just go ahead and let's say run your pipeline once out here. That's what it really means. And I'll say deploy. And once I say deploy, then I can go ahead and say the steps. So in a build, it was directly simple. You said jobs, and inside a job, you declared a job, and then steps. Then let's say you went ahead and declare the steps out here in a build stage. So you said job, you said the steps. You went ahead and directly did this. As simple as this is. But when you're doing a deployment, you need to mention additionally something called a strategy, and then your steps comes here. And after that, now I can go ahead and start giving my steps or start giving my tasks here. Like for example, the very first task that I put in here is that I would say I want to download the artifacts. So I'll say download artifacts from this particular build pipeline that I just generated. So I'll say current build and I'll say specific artifacts. I'll say artifact name is called drop. It's a drop artifacts that I need. It's a drop basically folder that I need to be downloaded. And I'll download everything into something called as system.artifact directory. I'll say please go ahead download all the artifacts out here. In a classic, you do not really have to mention that out. You just have to, let's say, tell this out and it'll just go ahead. I mean, just have to create the release and it'll just go ahead and download the artifact. In a, let's say, YAML pipeline, I'm declaring the artifact explicitly. I'll say add this out. And here, I can give a display name, telling custom artifact download, something like this. After that, I will now continue with my strategy for creating the infrastructure, which is ARM template, and then deploying the code into the created infrastructure. Two things. So you can look at the YAML also. You can just take the YAML. You can use this particular YAML file out here. Shouldn't be a problem. But what I like to do is I'll just go back into my pipeline. I'll just make sure my cursor is under the task. Now I'll go ahead and add a task called ARM template deployment. I will say service connection is sample connection. Subscription is Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. The resource group name is coming from the library, remember? So I'll say it is $RG name. And then I have the location. I'll say some random location out here like East US2. I'll scroll down. It's asking me where is your template. Now, this is important. In a classic pipeline, we could have just gone ahead, clicked on this template, and it would just go ahead and let's say tell me that okay, fine, this is my template. I could have just selected it out. I'd say web app.json or something. I could have selected this. I could have selected it out. But it's not that straightforward in classic. You'll have to give the template location where you want to create this in. Again, I am downloading all my artifacts in this directory called system.artifact directory. So I'll copy this, let's say path. I'll say in this directory, there is a folder called drop. So if you look at your pipeline, this is how your folder structure is coming out to be. Any artifact, if you look at it, you have it has something called drop. Inside that, it has something called webapp.json. I'm giving the same thing. So I'll say drop. So / drop. Inside that, there is something called something.json. Now the name I can give it in the form of a wildcard. I can say star star, which will just go ahead and whatever is the name of your artifact, it just isn't mine. You can also give webapp.json, but if you give a star, it will just say, okay, fine, you know what? I'll just go ahead, understand that whatever name here is with an extension called .json, I'll take that. I'll say, yes, this is what I want. And then you have the override template parameters. If you remember, these were the parameters, right? Which is hyphen app service name and hyphen web app name. I'll take the same thing. Here. So I am just passing the same overrides that I used in the classic by using, let's say, my YAML file. I'm just passing those parameters out here to the task out here. I'll make sure my cursor is placed here. I'll say add. This is how I added right now. An ARM template deployment task. You have to be careful with the path that you're giving and also the parameters how you're overriding this out. So I just took all these overrides from, let's say, my classic pipeline. I passed it here, and here I can just go ahead give a display name, optional again, but helps you in understanding what's happening. Let's say ARM template deployment, and and finally I'll come here and add one more task for the app service deployment out here. So if you see this, I have an app service deployment. Again, you can check the YAML. You can take this, copy this out, or I can simply go ahead and say show assistant. I'll say app service deploy. And it's now asking what is the Azure subscription, what is the web app name, and again it's the app service name that is coming from the library. So it's the app service name. I'll copy this out. I'll say it is dollar app service name. Then it's telling me where exactly is your artifact. Same thing. I took this path, right? Just copy this path, paste it here, and instead of telling it is .json, tell it's a .zip file because that's what I want to, let's say, really release out. And put your cursor here and say add. Now this is an app service deployment. So I'm firstly creating the app service and then redeploying this out. And I'll give a display name here, telling it is app service code deployment. These are the steps. So if you see this, I'll just scroll towards right. I had a stage called build. Build is going ahead and, let's say, building my entire code. Then I'm having a stage called deployment with a name called deployment out here. Then I said there's something called jobs. There's something called environment. I said environment name is called deployment or development. And then I had a strategy. And here in the strategy, I'm telling please run this once and deploy this out. And in the tasks, I'm downloading the artifact and I'm using the ARM template deployment task to create the infrastructure and then to deploy the code on the created infrastructure out here. This is what I'm doing end to end out here as such. Yes, any questions still here, guys, on how did I write my first stage? Anyone, any questions still here? And I think I have a branch policy. So I'll just slightly modify my policy to tell that please allow the requester to approve their own change. If I don't do that, I won't be able to approve my own change out there. So I have to again go ahead and, let's say, log in like a different user and then approve it out. So I'm just avoiding that, and I'll say save. And I'll say it's telling commit directly on the developer branch. You cannot do that because it's having a policy. I'll say added a stage called development, and I'll say create a new branch for this. I'll say feature Kiran dev YAML, something like this. Just save this out, and I'll go to my, let's say, pull requests. I have this pull request. I just added one more stage out here. The entire block got added. I'll set to autocomplete, delete the branch after it's merged, approve this out. So once approved, your pull request is going to get merged. So it's now merging the pull request into the develop branch. Now I'll use my pipeline service. I'll now trigger this pipeline off. I'll say run the pipeline, and it's telling okay fine which branch. I'll say main the develop branch out here. I'll say run, and now I'm running another pipeline. Now if you see, you have something called build, and after the build you have a development. So it's like the build pipeline plus the release pipeline combined together. I'm now giving something known as a multi-stage YAML pipeline out here, which has build and release together inside it. So I no longer have to use my release services at all. I no longer have to use this until unless you want to go with the classic route. So if we go here, again, it's trying to build this out. And once it builds out, it'll try to release the code. It'll try to go ahead and, let's say, do a deployment out here using this particular task out here in the development environment. So it'll tell, okay, fine, I'm doing it. First, it's trying to do a build right now. So let's give it a minute for the build to be completed. And once the build gets completed, it will go or it should move into the development. And in the development, it has a couple of things like, let's say, download the artifacts. So it's going to download your artifacts out here. Then it's going to create the ARM template deployment. And after that, it's going to just go ahead and deploy the code on the created app service. So now if you see, I don't have an RG called dev RG. I just have one RG called demo RG. And as a result of this particular pipeline, let me give it a second. Let me load this out. Yes, this is done. Now if you see, it's now going into development. It's telling deploy into development out here, and it's telling initialize job, and then it's going ahead and downloading the artifacts and so on and so forth. This is how my pipeline is running from one end to the other. So same thing, but earlier I did two pipelines, one for build, the other for, let's say, deployment. So one for build out here, the other for release. Now I'm clubbing both the pipelines together into one YAML file, and I'm adding it in the form of a stage, telling this is ARM template deployment. So now if you see, it's downloaded my artifacts into this particular folder. After that, it's using my artifacts right now, telling okay fine. It's telling okay fine, you know what, this is the artifact, I'll use this out. And it's trying to create the resource group. So it's telling dev rg is not there. It's trying to create that particular resource group out here. And after it created the resource group, it's now trying to deploy something inside the resource group out here. And when I say something, it's trying to create the app service plan and the app service. And once that's done, let's see what's the next step. So it's done. It'll take like a minute or so for the ARM template deployment to go in. And after that, it will push the code inside the created infrastructure. So let's wait for a couple of minutes. So ARM template deployment is done. So if you look at this, go into the resource group, you'll have an app service plan, and inside that particular app service plan, you have an app service that is running. So if I wait for a second, you have an app service that is running. All these values again are coming from my libraries. So if I go into the library, all these values are now coming from the library, telling app service name, app service plan name, environment, and RG name out here. And finally, it's going ahead and pushing the code inside this particular app service. So it's now going in and pushing that particular code out here as such. So same thing what I did in a release, I'm trying to, let's say, get the same service into the build. And I'm now trying to give, let's say, a multi-stage YAML pipeline which does a build and release into the development environment. Once this is done, I'll also show you how to add the other environments like QA, staging, production, and those things out here. It's rather more simple. So first, let's understand how did I add all these things. And once we understand how did I add all these things out here, or how did I add the first stage out here, I'll also go ahead and show you how do you go ahead and add the other stages out here as such. Yes, any questions, guys, till here? Anyone? Any questions that I can take till here? Anyone? Any questions that I can take till here? Again, as an example, if you're trying to, let's say, write YAML on your own, I'll go ahead share a sample pipeline with you all. This is a sample pipeline file. I'll go ahead share this out with you all. This can help you all in, let's say, guiding on how to, let's say, go ahead and build your files out there. So please take a look at this, and please let me know if you have any questions. But until here, does anyone have any doubts or any concerns till here? So now if you see the app service deployment is done, and if I click on the URL, it's going to take me to the app service, and it's going to, kind of give me the code out here. So I can do that by using, let's say, my app service URL link directly. And if I load this out, it's going to give you a home page telling that, okay, fine, welcome to .NET or something like that. The latest update that I've done, it's going to just give me that particular update out here as such. Yes, any questions till here? Anyone? Any questions that I can take till here? So if you see it's still loading the page, it'll take some time since it's an initial boot. It'll take some time to load that page, and it'll show me what kind of a code that got deployed out here as such. Any questions that I can take? All right. So how do I then add multiple stages? Now, as of now, I just have one stage called build. Sorry, I have two stages called build and development. Now, what I'll do is I'll just copy the entire development stage. I'll copy this entire stage. Go to the next line. Make sure your cursor is here. So making sure the cursor is under the stage right now. I'll add one more stage, and now I'll call the stage as QA. I'll change this to QA. I'll change this to QA out here because that's the library value that I need to use. So this is QA. This is what I'm using right now. I'll just scroll down. I'll say the environment is called QA. I'll just scroll down, and the remaining is the same. I'm not changing anything out here as such because I'm using the libraries. I'm reusing my tasks out here. This is good enough. And now after QA, I can just simply go ahead, come under the stage, and add one more stage out here called production or staging, whatever environment that you want to like to do out here. So you have a build, you have a development, then you have a QA, then you have, let's say, the production out here. So I'll say this is production. I'll say this is prod. I'll say the group here is also prod. This was a group out here, just prod out here. environment is also prod. I'll scroll down, and the remaining is the same. I'm not changing anything out here. So it's just the first step, or just the first stage of deployment that I'm adding. The rest I'm telling, okay, fine, all these are the other stages. I'll just save this out. I'll say added other stages like QA and prod, and I'll say this is a feature Kiran stages. Then start creating a pull request. If I go into my pull request right now, I said add multiple stages. I said autocomplete delete the branch after it's done. I'll upload this out. So now if you see, I'm adding multiple stages out here like QA and production, calling those environment variables out here like QA to QA for QA, production for production. Then I'll go ahead and rerun my pipeline. And the same I run my pipeline, I'll again select the develop branch. I'll say run this out. And once I run this pipeline, now I have multiple stages out here like build, and then I have a development, then I have a QA, then I have a production out here. So the code is moving from, let's say, something like a build. It's building the code out here. Then it's moving into development. Then it's moving into QA. Then finally it's moving into production out here as such. So this is the entire flow. So I've created now a train-like structure where the pipeline is moving from one environment to the other in a linear flow, in a linear model out here. Yes, any questions that I can take till here? Any questions that I can take till here?
How can I add pipeline variables instead of a variable group?
So how can I add a pipeline variable instead of a variable group? It's like this. This is your pipeline variable. So this was a group. The earlier one I did a group. If you want to, let's say, go ahead and add a pipeline variable out here instead of a group, let's collapse this out. Let's come here. So this is where I call my variable group out here. Let's see where I call this out. Let's see. Yes, this is where I call my variable group. Apart from, in a combination of a variable group, if you also want a pipeline variable, say hyphen, say name of the variable, let's say test variable, and you can give a value of the variable out here. So you can pass a group, and also you can pass a combination of variable groups and also the pipeline variables. So this is what you can do out here as such. Does this answer your question? Yes, any more questions, guys?
So, if you want to skip a particular stage and move to the next stage, what should I have done?
Okay, if you want to skip a particular stage and move to the next stage, which means that I want, let's say, something like build. I just want to, let's say, do a development and a QA. I don't want to do a production. Was that your question?
Sure.
So for that, if you say run pipeline, again select the file that you want to run the pipeline from, and you see here something called stages to run. If you click this one, it's going to tell you what are all the stages you want to run on. I can say, you know what, my stages to run are, let's say, something like, let's say, build. This is something that I need, and QA, not production. So I'll just skip this particular stage. So I'll just go ahead and, let's say, skip this particular stage. Let's say use selected stages, and I can click on run. And once I do a run, this stage, right, it will automatically get skipped. So you can do that while you're creating your pipeline itself. So when you're creating a pipeline itself, you can, sorry, when you're creating a pipeline itself, you can really do that out here as such. You can use the stages to run, and you can skip those stages that you do not need out here as such. Does that answer your question?
So I have to do it manually, right? Not in the
Even
Amazon.
in, yeah, not in YAML file. In YAML file also, you can go ahead and, let's say, select the condition in which you want to run this out. You can give something called conditions, but you can, preferably you can go ahead and do manually out here as such.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, any more
Sir,
questions,
good
guys?
morning, sir.
Good morning, go ahead, please.
Sir, can I put my ML pipeline in form of a file in multiple repositories by creating pull
Yes,
request?
yes, you can do that. While creating pull request, you cannot do it, but after your pull request is done, you can do something called cherry pick. You can say cherry pick. and you can take a different branch of your repositories and kind of give this out. But while creating a pull request, you cannot put it in multiple repositories. You'll have to do that manually if you have multiple repositories out there. That's something that you have to place the file manually out there as such.
Yes, sir. By creating without a by creating a pull request, we can do that.
uh, to multiple branches of the same repository. But if you want multiple files, sorry, multiple, let's say, repositories, you want to target the same file to multiple repositories, you'll have to come manual, manual approach for that, because it's an entire different repository system, right? So in this repository, if you say that, what, I need this file, you'll have to go ahead and add that file out here manually.
Okay. Okay. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions here, guys? All right. So let's look at a pipeline and let's see where a pipeline is. So now if you see, it's done with development. It's now moving to QA, and it's also going ahead and let's say deploying the code onto the QA. After this is done, it will move into production and deploy the code into production out here. So multiple stages out here that are integrated into the same build pipeline. So now I'm calling this as a multi-stage YAML release pipeline out here. So it also has a build, it also has a development, also has a QA, also has a production. This is running completely to just go ahead and build my environment, just go ahead and build my code, and this is to prepare all my other environments. Now, one quick concept that I want to cover here is this. See, there is something called as approvals and gates. Approvers. Why do you need an approver is very simple. If I want to, let's say, take my code into an environment called development, I want the tech lead of that particular development team to tell me that yes, no developer is using the, let's say, platform. Please go ahead and deploy your code, because if you do a code deployment, right, you'll have a very small outage. The application will not be available during the time when you deploy the code out here. So I need an approval from the tech lead of the development team to tell me that okay, fine, I'm good with this. Go ahead, deploy this out. Same way, I also need, let's say, an approval from the QA lead. Same way, I also need an approval from my client. Very important, to go ahead and push my code into the production. Now, these are the approvals that I need to have in place. In a classic pipeline, it's straightforward. Now, if you go into the classic pipeline out here, let's say I did this out. If you click on this, let's say, icon, right, which is called pre-deployment approval conditions, you can just scroll down. There's something called pre-deployment approvals. You can say, I'll give my name here. I'll probably take myself as the tech lead of the development. I'll say approver. I'll say go to QA. Let's say I am also the QA. I'm just giving a very hypothetical condition. In here, you'll have different persons that are approving your code. You can say as Azure DevOps, and I'll treat myself as a client too. I'll say pre-deployment approval conditions. I can go ahead and add the approvals out here. What happens when you do this? Say added approvals. And what happens really when you do this? If I create a release, if I say create, and release 12 has been created in a classic, as in this is created, I'll have an approval button out here saying, okay, fine, do you want to really approve this out? Do you want to really take this code out right now? Now, the tech lead of a development team will now have a call here. They'll say, okay, fine, are my developers using that particular services? If they are not, let me go ahead and approve this out. After this is done, it'll come here. It'll wait for an approval here as well. The QA will come. Okay, fine. The QA will have a word with the tech lead of the development team. Ask him, what kind of the test cases that they've run. Is the application really working? If it's okay, then I'll take it into QA. After QA, I'll push it to stage and then into production with the right amount of approvals out here. So if you look at my classic, I just went ahead, click on the man icon. I just went ahead, put all the approvals out here. Will work. In a YAML pipeline, it's slightly different. In a YAML pipeline, if I want to if I want to enable approvers out here, there is something called as a property which is called environment that I put in. What this is really going to do is that each and everything I went ahead and said the environment is called QA, the environment is called production. So I changed my environments out here. The environment is in place so that you can give whatever conditions that you need and whatever approvals that you need. And your pipeline would have by now created something called an environment out here. So in the left hand side, if you see, there is something called pipelines, and below the pipelines there's something called environments. So I'll click on this, and now I have multiple environments that have got created, called development, production, and QA. If I go here into development, here there is something called more actions. I can say approvals and checks. Inside the approvals and checks, I can say add, I can say approvals, and here I can give who needs to approve this out. In case I'll say plus Azure DevOps, create this out. Now I add an approver. The same thing, I'll go to QA, I'll say approvals and checks, I'll say add, I'll say approvals, I'll say next, I'll say I'm the approver, I'll say add this out, create this out. Same thing for production. I'll go into prod, I'll say approvals and checks out here, I'll say approvers, I'll say next, I'll say this is the approver, add him out. This is how you can do it for a YAML pipeline. In a classic, it was just that, the pre-deployment approval, you'll just have to, let's say, slide that out and give the approval out there. But in a YAML, it's slightly different. So now if I'll just go ahead and cancel this out, I don't need this right now to run. So I cancel the deployment. I'll wait for this to go through. And once this is done, now if I go ahead create a new, now if I go ahead create a new release out here, or create a new pipeline, new instance of the pipeline out here, I'll say run, I'll say development, and I can select what are the stages that I need to run. I'll say run this out. And once I run this out, the build should happen. And once the build happens, out here, it would move into development. And before it kicks off the code inside the development, I'll now have here something called as an approve button. So it'll tell me, okay, fine, the code is waiting for your approval. Do you want to give an approval out here as such? So this is how you can include approvers out there. So let's wait for a minute for this code to, let's say, really run out here. So it's telling now it's going to do the .NET Restore build and all these things out. So we should wait for a minute. And after a minute, we can check how the approvers come into picture out here as such. Yes, any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here? Anyone, any questions I can take till here? Are we all good, guys? And also I have given the YAML file for you all. So when you're creating a YAML file, please take that as a reference, but try to, let's say, write a YAML file from the scratch. That will help you all to develop the skills on YAML. And not only YAML is used, let's say, in the Azure DevOps part, but even when we go into, let's say, Kubernetes, going forward, when you go into Kubernetes out there, even there, you will have YAMLs coming into picture. So now if you see, now the build is completed, and now the development is waiting for the review. So if I click on review, I can say approved, something like this. I can give a comment. I can say approve, and once it's approved, only then we'll go ahead and, let's say, start this phase. Otherwise, it'll just be stuck there. It won't, let's say, go ahead and start any phase out here as such. Yes, any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here that I can take? Anyone, any
Sir,
questions that I can take?
sir, here also for approval, that will go into the team lead in the form of emails only, isn't it, sir?
Yes. So by now, if I check my email, right? So I gave my name. So you see, there's an email that got triggered automatically telling that, your approval is required for this particular stage called development. I can review the approval from here. I can go ahead and give this out. So yes, this will come in the form of an email.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes. Any more questions, guys? Anyone? Any questions that I can take till here? Anyone? Any questions? And one final thing, in a classic pipeline, when we did an edit, we could have mentioned what is the let's say structure of the pipeline. Meaning, I could say that, okay, fine, after development go to QA, after QA go to stage, after stage go to, let's say, production. I could do that. I could also alter this out by coming here. I can say the let's say the trigger out here. Let's go there, and it's telling after stage, and I have a stage called development. If I click on after release, the pipeline is now going to be slightly altered. telling that as and when you have a build pipeline, go it to take it to development and also take it to QA. Probably I want to do the stage in same way. I'll say after release, and but production should go only after stage. Now I can do it in this way. I can rearrange my pipeline in this order. So I'll say pipeline rearranged. I can do this order. I can put this order in a YAML. If I go ahead, I'll have to edit the pipeline, and if I want to now establish that particular order out here, I need to come up with something called as dependencies. In build, I'm not doing anything. In this particular stage, I would say in development, I would say a condition called depends on, and here I'll say it depends on something called as build. So I'll tell you, okay, fine, this is on build. For QA also, I can say, okay, fine, this depends on explicitly, this depends upon build. So I'll say depends on say build. And for production, I'll say depends on, and I'll say QA. So I want to give something like this. I want to have a build pipeline. As and when the build happens, it should simultaneously go to development and QA. The code should simultaneously go here, and only after QA it needs to go into production. You can rearrange the pipelines using a condition called depends on. If I do that, let's see what will really happen out here. I'll save this out. I'll say this is feature added depends on, and I'll say start a pull request. And as soon as I do that, I'll just go and approve approve my own pull request out here. Okay, as application, I'll approve my own pull request out here. And once I approve my pull request, I'll go ahead and trigger my pipeline off. I'll go ahead say pipelines. I'll say run a pipeline from that particular branch called develop branch. And as soon as I run a pipeline, so this is how it's going to look like. So it's telling, okay, fine, I will deploy it parallelly towards, let's say, the development and the QA, but I will wait until, and I'll wait to go to production until QA is done. So this is how I can rearrange my pipeline in a YAML syntax. So classic was pretty straightforward. You can just go ahead and let's say rearrange it directly from the graphical editor. YAML, you'll have to make a change inside the file, commit that file, approve, get your pull request approved, and only then you'll get this particular structure out here as such. Yes, any questions, guys? Anyone, any questions I can take till you?
Sir, it means once gets the approvals only, it will move to the next environment, right, sir?
Yes, yes, only
In,
once it gets
in,
the approval, and not only the approval, it has to
Mhm.
complete the environment. It has to successfully run inside this particular environment. So if it doesn't successfully run in this particular environment, it will not even go into production. It'll just skip production out here.
The classic also doing the same only, sir. Once QA is completed on it, then it will move into the production only,
Yes,
right, sir?
yes, correct. But earlier QA was only possible. I mean, I could only go into QA provided my development was done. Now I'm not waiting for my development to be done. If you see, both are waiting for my approval. It's a parallel deployment procedure that I've implemented. So I'm parallel taking my code to both the environments, but to production, I'm only taking it after QA. So only after QA is done, it will go into production. Until then, it won't even start production out here for you.
Okay, okay. Thank you, sir. Got it.
Yes. Any more questions, guys?
Sir, and for the approval, the process remains same, no, sir? We have to go to users and add viewer.
Correct. The approval process remains the same. You'll have to go to users, add the user, and then add the user out here in the approval section. So that process remains the same. But where you go ahead and let's say give the approval, you will have to go into the environments and then mention who's the approver and so on and so forth.
So for in the classic build, after the release only, that code will be sent to different stages. But in the AML, we have done only build.
Hmm. Correct.
So
So
there
this
is
is where
no
build is
release.
happening. There's no release. This itself is a release. So that's what I was saying, is that you just need one particular pipeline service inside which you're doing a build plus release. Both of them are mentioned out here. So it's a multi-stage pipeline, multi-stage build plus release pipeline out here. So you do not need, let's say, uh, another release pipeline to go ahead and, let's say, release your code. Everything is mentioned inside this particular file. So everything basically it's embedded inside this particular file out here.
Sir, like when we are doing any project standard, standards we have to apply when we are creating the build, any naming
Uh,
or something.
Naming conventions are not really, but you make sure that the pipeline name is actually notable. That's the main thing that I would say is pipeline name is actually notable. By looking at the pipeline, you'll have to tell for which service this build is going on, and if possible include some test cases, meaning you can work with your QAs, include some test cases out here to make sure that whenever you're building your code, you're also testing the code out there, so that you are sure that the code is bug free and all these things. So a couple of standards that we can follow out here in order to make sure that our entire software development lifecycle is going smooth.
And one more thing, if application is requires any prerequisites or dependencies
Mm-hmm.
to test the functionality,
Okay.
like how we should, or it is like how to handle prerequisites or dependencies here.
When you say dependencies, do you mean after deployment you want to test your application, or like how is it exactly? Can you please elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Means like if I don't know here how it works, but like if some application has to work, means it should relate with some other application. If that is only installed,
Mm-hmm.
application will work fine. So before in QA also we need to test if it is going fine, then only it will go to production. So
Yes. So what you can do is that at the end of development, we could add one more stage, which is called integration testing. I mean, you can test the application, telling that is the application really working out here? Now, are the all dependencies installed out here? If it's not, then again repeat the cycle. Now go to your build, correct your code, make sure that the dependencies are rightly, let's say, restored, and then go ahead and do a deployment. So what you can do at the end is, right now I do not include that. I will any which ways go ahead and give a demo for a complete project, and then I can tell you how integration testing is actually done. So at the
okay,
end of a development phase, we could include some test cases, some test runs,
okay,
and these test runs can go ahead and, let's say, verify whether your application is really running. Only then it will take the code into, let's say, the next environment like a QA. So
okay,
we can go ahead and do that out here as such.
okay, okay. Thank you.
Yes, no problem. Any more questions, guys?
Once the development team approves, then
Mhm.
for the QA we have to again run the pipeline, or automatically it will get approved.
No, for if I mean you have to approve it individually. So see, if you see, there are two approvals that are required: one for the development and one for the, let's say, QA. So these are two individual stages, right? So you need one for the development and the other one for QA out here as such. Yes. Any more questions, guys?
Hi, Abhishek.
Go ahead, please.
So, like after running a build pipeline, we produce artifacts, right?
Correct.
So what type of file is this artifact is?
It's a .zip file. It's all your, let's say, code built packed together. So it's packaged together, and you're giving a .zip file, and then I have a .json file for your ARM template. So I did two different artifacts out here. So this is a .zip file, and I'm taking that particular .zip file and I'm deploying it using my pipelines out here as such. So in here, I'm using that particular .zip file and pushing the entire .zip file on the application that I created.
Okay,
Does it
thank
answer your question? Okay. Any more questions, guys, that I can take?
Sir, one more doubt, sir.
Good, please.
Sir, once code is running in successfully after getting the all approvals, then once code
Mhm.
is running in the development stage, when you move into
Right.
the some other environment like QA, Before that, the test QA people should configure all the test cases inside the test environment, right, sir?
They can do that, or your pipeline can run tests on behalf of them. So your
Okay,
pipeline can have those test cases, and as a part of the code build procedure, we can run those test cases out here as such.
means as a we as a DevOps engineer we can also do that, right, sir?
We can, yes, we can add a step so that we can call those test cases. The test cases, however, have to be written by a QA. We don't write the test cases. We don't do that. The test cases have to
Okay,
be written by a QA. You can just call those test cases just like you're calling the CS project of your code. So you have something called test.cs project. You can call that particular test case and you can run that particular test case. That's something that you can help with.
okay, sir. Thank you.
So generally in the project, when we are creating the release or build for
Okay.
YAML using, so there will be any standard templates like in the project wise it will be there for
You can
creation.
create templates. Again, there isn't a standard template as of now that Microsoft is rolling out, but you can go ahead and create your own templates. You just need to, let's say, understand what exactly is the flow cycle, meaning do you want to, let's say, first create the infrastructure and then push the code inside it. If you just have that particular understanding, you can go ahead and create sorry, you can go ahead and create your own templates and call the templates in different projects out here. But as of now, there isn't any standard template that Microsoft is really suggesting us.
Okay, means we are not using any custom templates.
No, we're not using a custom template. It's something that needs to be built from a scratch.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
No problem. Any more questions, guys? All right, so that's it from my end today, guys.
Sir,
Please go ahead, please.
sir, you said about mock test to conduct to the freshers. Could you please tell me that
Mhm.
when you conduct a mock test to us?
No, it's not a mock test that I was telling. I was telling a mock interview. So I can take a mock interview provided you send me your resumes across so I can have a look at that, and we can schedule some time during the class hour and we can take a mock interview out here.
Okay, okay, sir. And one more thing, sir.
Mhm.
I was sent my resume to your mail, sir, and I
Yes,
sent 2 days back.
yes, got it. I got it, but I couldn't really find time. Kalyan, right? So I'll take a look at all
Yes,
these resumes that I go.
yes, sir.
I'll take. I mean, I'll need to, let's
Abhishek.
say, verify all the resumes. I'll do that. Okay, I'll do that and send it across.
Hello.
Good, please.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Abhishek. Deepak this side.
Good, good, please.
Can we connect tomorrow? You said by Saturday, so I think you are busy today.
A little bit. Yes, I can. I can allocate some time tomorrow, Deepak. That shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, tomorrow sure. Because by what time if you can reply me on the mail, that will be great. Have you seen my resume?
I did see your resume. I did check your resume. I have a couple of points that I've noted. I've made the observation, but I didn't send the email. I wanted to have a call with you and then discuss about the same thing. So tomorrow I have a
Yes, yes.
class in the morning, and
Today,
after that I
after
can.
this class,
Mhm. Go ahead, please.
sure, sure. By 10 o'clock, I'm having an interview with Cognizant. So,
Okay.
more back. Mostly they are asking from this, what is called this, from my resume itself.
Yes, correct.
Like app service, what kind of,
Mm-hmm.
how you have deployed, where you have deployed it, how it has been working, everything.
Okay.
I don't have any idea about that, what I have done in the resume. Because, somebody in the
Mm-hmm.
institute guided me. He just changed
Okay.
this and this. Everything will be
Okay.
fine. So
Okay.
first, I think I have
Again,
to be proper in my resume itself.
correct. You have to see your resume and you have to relate your resume to the class videos that we have kind of done. Like for example, you say app service, right? So we created app services, we deployed app services using ARM template and all these things. Huh? So I can help you give a proper flow, but we can have a call and we can discuss on that.
Is there any mock for that?
Sorry,
Like
mock
for the
for what?
interviews?
Yes, there are mock
Interviews?
interviews as I was telling. Yes, I mean, we will be conducting mock interviews once we go through a project work and once we are done with Dockers and Kubernetes. I'm just waiting for that particular time. So it'll take one more, 1.5 week basically for me to complete those concepts. Once that's done, we can start with mocks.
Okay. Sure. I have few questions which I have gone through the interviews, which interviewer has asked me. Like, where do you publish your app or deploy? What kind of pipeline you create, classic or
Hmm.
YAML? What is
Okay.
agile method?
Mm-hmm.
And what is auto scaling and
Okay.
utilizing web app slots for zero downtime deployment? How you make
Okay.
sure?
Mm-hmm.
Then what is app gateway?
Okay.
Which app service we have used? Which tool
Mm-hmm.
used to upload images? What kind of
Mm-hmm.
image we have uploaded? Can
Okay.
you please let me know what kind of image we have uploaded?
First thing, when you say image, are you talking about a Docker image again? When you say image that you're
That he
uploading,
has not clarified me anything.
right? So because when you say image that we're uploading, you're talking about a Docker image out here. So apart from that particular Docker image,
Okay.
all the questions that you asked is something that we have already discussed in the classes. We said zero downtime deployment. We said app service slots.
Mhm.
We said what is auto scaling. We said what is application insights. What is a tool to, where do you publish your code? We publish our code, let's say in the Azure pipeline section. Take that code and again deploy it upon, let's say, a platform like an app service. So all the questions that you see are from your resume, and the resume is nothing but, it's a template that is coming out from the class section. Whatever we discuss in the class, we are putting it in the form of a resume and sending
Uh-huh.
it across to you, telling you, okay, fine, this is the thing. So images, we haven't really come to that part. I'll talk about what Docker images really are, and how do you use those images and so on and so forth.
Can you please let me know only one with in one line what is auto scaling?
Auto scaling. So what exactly the auto scaling is? Very simple. You have an app service, and you are getting a lot of incoming traffic. You want to increase the number of instances of the application running in the background, and you want to make
Uh,
sure that this happens depending upon the load or depending upon the incoming traffic. That's what auto scaling really means, meaning you're adding multiple, let's say, instances in the background, reducing the instances in the background. That's called auto scaling of your applications out here.
okay. Is there one last question? Is there any question and answers do you have like from the resume so we can be perfect
From
on it?
the resume, I am not, let's say, specifying on someone's resume because it's going to become a little difficult for me to, let's say, do that. But I have in general
Mhm.
a lot of interview questions that I've, let's say, posted out here. So these are the links that I've, kind of published earlier also. But I'll just
Yeah,
go ahead
I
and
have
give you
gone
those.
through that. Not one question also they have not asked from there.
I'll tell you, it's not going to be like, what, this is the question they're asking you from there. No, it's not going to be like that, Deepak.
Hmm.
It's each and every interview. It's
Okay.
not like a Q&A session, right? So they're not going to tell you, okay, fine, what is the app service name? No, it's not like that. I'm giving you sample questions. It's
Uh-huh.
not that something that they are going to ask you out here from here. It's the concept that I want to focus on depending upon the question. And I go into the concept, you have something like, tell me about PaaS, tell me about something like auto scaling, something like that. All those things are present out
Uh-huh.
here. What is the difference between them? What is the difference with the consumption plan? If you click on that, you'll get additional documentation out there, and that's the expectation. That's the expectation from these questions out there. It's not that these questions will come in the interview. Do you see this called app service auto scaling? And what is the auto scaling guidance? And if you would have checked this out,
Yes, yes.
you would have understood what really auto scaling is, right?
Yes, yes.
And I've also defined what exactly is an auto scaling out here. That's what they've asked you. They will not ask you, okay, fine, I have an app service now. They are not going to ask you the same question out here. They're gonna ask you the question in a very twisted way. It is you who have to, let's say,
Mhm.
understand how do you link the question to the concept. That's the reason concepts are important, questions are not. So you see the
Okay.
apps auto scaling and all these things. So
Uh,
everything that they've asked is here.
can I leave this meeting now because they are calling me by 10 I have to join.
Yes, you can leave the meeting. I mean, anyways, I'm let's say ending the class session right now. So you can leave the meeting now. All the best for the
Yeah.
interview. Let me know how it goes.
Please update me tomorrow by what time we can connect. So I'll be
Sure,
available and
I'll update it by today in the evening. Okay.
yes, sure. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, guys, that's it from mine. Thank you, and have a good day ahead. And we'll meet on Monday. Tomorrow we won't have a session, so we'll meet on Monday, and we'll discuss. And we'll start with something called Terraforms out here. Yeah. Thanks, guys, and have a good day ahead. Thank you.